The realtor's nervous laugh should have been my first warning, but I was too busy staring at the ramshackle disaster on Magnolia Lane to notice the red flags waving frantically in my peripheral vision. I stood in front of what could generously be called a house in Riverside Oaks, California, a gated community about 40 minutes outside Sacramento, where perfectly manicured lawns and pristine Mediterranean-style homes lined every street except this one. The property before me looked like it had been abandoned mid-apocalypse. Shingles dangled from the roof like broken teeth, the shutters hung at drunken angles, and the yard resembled a jungle that nature had enthusiastically reclaimed. Paint peeled in long strips, revealing rotting wood underneath. One of the second-floor windows was boarded up with plywood that had warped from rain exposure. My name is Frank Jameson, and I am a licensed contractor with 15 years of experience flipping houses in Northern California. I had seen worse properties, though admittedly not in neighborhoods where the median home price hovered around $2 million. This monstrosity was listed at $350,000, which in this zip code was essentially pocket change. The realtor, a sweaty man named Doug who kept tugging at his collar, cleared his throat. "So, Mr. Jameson, as you can see, this property needs some work. The previous owner passed away 6 years ago and there was a lengthy probate situation. The family just wants it gone." I walked around the perimeter, my contractor's eye cataloging the issues. Foundation looked surprisingly solid despite the cosmetic nightmare. The lot was substantial, almost half an acre, with mature oak trees that would be worth their weight in gold once everything else was sorted out. The bones were good. Everything else was terrible, but bones mattered most. "I will take it," I said. Doug blinked. "You do not want to see inside first. I have seen enough. Let us write up an offer." 3 weeks later, I owned the ugliest house in Riverside Oaks, and that was when I met Patricia Henderson. I was unloading tools from my truck on a Wednesday morning when a silver BMW pulled up behind me, blocking my vehicle. A woman in her early 50s emerged, wearing white capri pants and a lavender polo shirt that probably cost more than my entire outfit. Her blonde hair was cut in that aggressive soccer mom style that somehow always looks helmet-like, and her face was already pinched into an expression of profound disapproval. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You cannot park that monstrosity here. This is a residential neighborhood, not a construction zone." I set down the toolbox I was carrying and turned to face her. "Good morning. I am Frank Jameson. I just bought this property." Her eyes widened, and then she did something I would never forget. She laughed. It was not a polite chuckle or a friendly giggle. It was a full-throated, condescending laugh that made her whole body shake. "You bought this." She gestured at the house like it was a rotting corpse. "This disaster. Oh, this is rich. Do you have any idea what you have gotten yourself into?" "I am a contractor. I know exactly what I am doing. I am Patricia Henderson, president of the Riverside Oaks Homeowners Association, and I can promise you that we will be watching every single thing you do to this property. We have standards here, very strict standards." She pulled out her phone and started tapping at the screen. "Your truck is in violation of HOA Code Section 4.7, which states that commercial vehicles cannot be parked on residential streets between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. That is a $50 fine." I felt my jaw tighten. "I am unloading materials. It will be moved in 10 minutes. The violation has already occurred. You will receive a notice in the mail." She walked closer to the property line, her nose wrinkling. "And this yard is in violation of sections 3.2, 3.4, 3.8, and probably a dozen others. The grass cannot exceed 4 inches in height. Your grass is over 2 feet in places. That is $100 per day until it is corrected. I have owned the property for less than 72 hours. That is not my problem. The HOA bylaws are very clear. All properties must maintain certain standards regardless of occupancy or ownership status. I suggest you familiarize yourself with the rulebook immediately. She thrust a thick binder toward me. Every homeowner received one. You should have gotten yours in your closing documents. I took the binder, which had to weigh at least 5 pounds. I will read through it, see that you do, and Mr. Jameson. She looked at the house with undisguised contempt. Some properties are beyond saving. You might want to consider cutting your losses and selling to a developer who will tear this monstrosity down and build something appropriate for this neighborhood. I know several people who would be interested. The house is not being torn down. I am renovating it. Another laugh. Renovating. This place needs to be demolished. But please, waste your money if you want. Just make sure you follow every single HOA regulation while you do it. I will be checking. Daily. She climbed back into her BMW and drove off, leaving me standing there with a 5-pound rule book and a growing sense that this project was going to be more complicated than I had anticipated. I spent that evening reading through the HOA regulations, and my stomach sank with every page. The bylaws were insane. Paint colors had to be selected from an approved palette of 12 shades, all variations of beige and cream. Any exterior modification required written approval from the HOA board, which met once monthly. Lawns had to be maintained weekly. No vehicles could be visible in driveways overnight except for personal passenger cars. No construction noise before 9 a.m. or after 5 p.m. The list went on for 200 pages, but I had dealt with difficult HOAs before. I would follow their rules, do everything by the book, and create something spectacular. The house had potential that Patricia Henderson could not see through her narrow, judgmental lens. The next morning, I hired a landscaping crew to tackle the jungle that was pretending to be a yard. Within 6 hours, they had mowed, trimmed, and hauled away 3 truckloads of debris. The property still looked rough, but at least it no longer resembled an abandoned lot. Patricia showed up at 4:30 p.m., right as the crew was finishing. The noise ordinance states that lawn equipment cannot be operated after 5 p.m., she announced, clipboard in hand. It is 4:30, I replied. You are cutting it very close. I will be watching. She made a show of examining the work. The lawn is acceptable barely. But that will be $200 in fines for the days it was in violation before you corrected it. You said the fine was $100 per day. It was, for 2 days, $200 total. I wanted to argue but decided to pick my battles. Fine. What is the mailing address for HOA payments? She smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. It will be on the violation notices. You will receive them in 3 to 5 business days. We are very efficient. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 7 violation notices. One for having a dumpster delivered before 9 a.m., even though the delivery driver was the one who showed up early and I had specifically requested a later time. One for parking my truck in the driveway overnight. One for having construction materials visible from the street. The fines added up to over $600, and I had barely started the actual renovation work. I paid them all, documenting everything carefully. Something about Patricia's attitude felt personal, like she was targeting me specifically, and I wanted records if things escalated. The real work began in early October. I started with the roof, which needed to be completely replaced. I hired a crew I had worked with before, good guys who showed up on time and did quality work. We pulled permits through the county, submitted detailed plans to the HOA board, and waited for approval. 3 weeks later, I received a rejection letter. The HOA board had denied my roof plans because the shingle color was not on the approved list. Never mind that the color I had selected, a warm terracotta that would complement the Mediterranean style of the neighborhood, was nearly identical to half the roofs on the street. It was not on the official list, therefore it was rejected. I went to the next HOA board meeting, which was held in the community clubhouse on a Tuesday evening. About 20 residents attended, most of them older couples who looked like they spent their days finding things to complain about. Patricia sat at the head of the table, flanked by 4 other board members. "Mr. Jameson," she said when I raised my hand during the public comment period, "I assume you are here about your roof denial." "I am. The color I selected is virtually identical to approved roofs throughout the neighborhood. I brought samples to compare." I held up the shingle samples I had prepared. "The rules are very clear. All materials must be selected from the approved list. Your color is not on that list." "Then I would like to request that the color be added to the list. It is a standard terracotta shade available from every major roofing manufacturer." Patricia glanced at the other board members, who all looked supremely bored. "We will take your request under advisement. The board will discuss it at next month's meeting." "Next month? I need to get this roof done before the rainy season starts. That is only a few weeks away." "Then I suggest you select a color from the approved list, Mr. Jameson. We cannot make exceptions just because someone is impatient." I left that meeting furious but determined. I selected a different shingle color from the approved list, a bland tan that clashed horribly with the house's style, and resubmitted my plans. They were approved within 48 hours. The roof went up in mid-October, and I had to admit it looked terrible. The tan was all wrong for the architecture, making the house look washed out and cheap. But it was weatherproof, and that mattered more than aesthetics at this stage. Next came the windows. All the old ones needed to be replaced. I measured, ordered custom windows that matched the Mediterranean style, and submitted those plans to the HOA board. Another rejection. The window trim color was not approved. I wanted to scream. Instead, I filed an appeal, attended another board meeting, and sat through an hour of discussions about whether someone on Willow Court should be allowed to install a new mailbox that was 6 inches taller than the standard size. When my turn came, Patricia dismissed my appeal in about 30 seconds. "The trim color you have selected is too dark. It does not match the neighborhood aesthetic. What trim color would be acceptable? Any color from the approved list. The approved list only has white and cream. Those colors will look ridiculous with the tan roof you made me install." "That is not the board's concern, Mr. Jameson. Follow the rules or face further penalties." I followed the rules. I ordered white trim, and the windows went in during November. The house now had a tan roof and bright white trim, a combination that made it look like a confused beach cottage rather than a Mediterranean villa. But I had a plan. While waiting for various HOA approvals, I focused on the interior. The inside of the house did not require HOA approval, and that was where I could really work magic. I gutted everything down to the studs. The old plumbing was replaced with new copper. The electrical system was completely redone with modern wiring and a 200-amp service panel. I installed high-efficiency HVAC with zoned climate control. The foundation was reinforced and waterproofed. I worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week. My background was in high-end custom homes, and I knew how to do things right. Every joint was perfect. Every surface was level. Every detail was considered. Patricia continued to show up at least twice a week, always finding something to complain about. My truck was parked at the wrong angle. Materials were visible from certain angles. I started work at 8:58 a.m. instead of 9. The fines kept coming and I kept paying them, documenting every single violation notice with photographs and timestamps. By mid-December, I had paid over $3,000 in HOA fines, but the house was starting to take shape. The interior was stunning. I had opened up walls to create a flowing floor plan with soaring ceilings. The kitchen featured custom cabinetry in a rich walnut, commercial-grade appliances, and a massive island with a quartzite countertop that looked like flowing marble. The bathrooms had heated floors, rainfall showers, and fixtures that belonged in a five-star hotel. I was installing the master bedroom fireplace when Patricia showed up with two other people I had not seen before. One was a tall man in a suit who introduced himself as Gerald Morrison, the HOA's attorney. The other was a county inspector named Helen Clark. "Mr. Jameson," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we have received reports that you may be doing unpermitted work. Mr. Morrison and Inspector Clark are here to verify that all your renovations are properly documented." I wiped the dust from my hands. "Every permit is posted in the front window, as required by county code. You are welcome to inspect them." Helen Clark, who looked like she had been dragged away from something more important, walked to the window and examined the permits. "Everything appears to be in order. Mr. Jameson has permits for electrical, plumbing, structural modifications, and HVAC installation, all filed properly." Patricia's smile faltered. "But what about HOA approval? Some of these modifications may require board review." "The HOA has no jurisdiction over interior renovations," Gerald Morrison said quietly, glancing at Patricia. "We discussed this before coming here." "But surely the fireplace requires approval. It is a structural modification." Helen Clark shook her head. "The fireplace is covered under his structural permit, which was approved by the county. The HOA cannot override county permits." I could see Patricia's frustration building. She walked through the space, her heels clicking on the concrete subfloor, looking for anything to object to. "Your construction materials are blocking the sidewalk," she finally said, pointing to a pallet of tile sitting in the driveway. "The sidewalk is not blocked. There is a clear path of at least 4 feet. It is still a violation of the aesthetic standards. Materials should not be visible from the street. The materials will be moved inside by end of day." She left with her attorney and the inspector, but I could tell this was far from over. Patricia Henderson was not the type to give up easily. The holidays came and went. I spent Christmas Day working on the house, taking a break only to eat leftover Chinese food and call my sister in Portland. The house was becoming an obsession. Every day revealed new possibilities. I found original hardwood floors under layers of carpet and linoleum. I discovered that the attic had enough height to be converted into a stunning master suite with dormer windows and exposed beam ceilings. The garage could be expanded and finished as a workspace. January brought the rains, and that was when I discovered Patricia's next move. I arrived at the property one morning to find an official notice taped to the door. The HOA was filing a lien against the property for unpaid fines totaling $4,200. I had paid every fine. I had the canceled checks and email confirmations to prove it. I immediately called the HOA management company, a firm called Premier Community Services, and demanded an explanation. The woman on the phone sounded bored. "Our records show multiple outstanding violations for the property at 847 Magnolia Lane. The fines must be paid before the lien can be released." "I paid all those fines. I can send you proof. Please forward your documentation to our accounting department." They will review it within 30 business days. 30 days. You filed a lien against my property, and I have to wait a month for you to confirm that I already paid what I owed. That is our policy, sir. I hired my own attorney, a sharp woman named Rebecca Chen who specialized in HOA disputes. She looked over my documentation and shook her head. "This is harassment," she said. "You have proof of payment for every fine. The lien is fraudulent. We can fight this." "How long will that take?" "Could be months. HOA cases move slowly. In the meantime, I suggest documenting everything. Every interaction with Mrs. Henderson, every violation notice, every payment. If there is a pattern of harassment, we can file a countersuit." I started keeping a detailed log. Every time Patricia showed up, I noted the date, time, and what she said. I installed security cameras around the property to document any incidents. I was done playing nice. The renovation continued through February and March. I added the dormer master suite, complete with a private balcony that overlooked the mature oak trees in the backyard. I built custom built-ins in the home office. The guest bedrooms received the same high-end treatment as the master. I even added a wine cellar in the basement, climate-controlled and lined with custom racks. Patricia's visits became less frequent, but the violation notices did not stop. I was cited for having contractors park on the street, for having a portable toilet delivered for the workers, for creating dust that allegedly drifted onto neighboring properties. Each fine was paid immediately, documented, and added to the growing file that Rebecca was building. By April, the interior was nearly complete. I started working on the exterior, and that was when things got interesting. I needed HOA approval for the paint colors, so I submitted a request using colors from the approved list. I chose a warm cream for the body of the house and a soft white for the trim, exactly the kind of bland combination that dominated the neighborhood. The request was denied. The reason given was that the colors, while individually approved, were not an approved combination. I attended the next board meeting with Rebecca. When my item came up, she stood and addressed the board. "My client has submitted a paint plan using only approved colors from the HOA's official palette. On what grounds was this denied?" Patricia shuffled papers. "The combination of those particular shades is not aesthetically pleasing. The bylaws make no mention of color combinations, only that colors must be selected from the approved list. My client has done exactly that. The board has discretion to deny any request that does not meet community standards." Rebecca smiled. "Can you show me in the bylaws where that discretionary power is defined?" The room went silent. The other board members looked uncomfortable. Finally, the vice president, a man named Donald Turner, spoke up. "Patricia, maybe we should approve this. He is using approved colors." "The application is incomplete," Patricia said quickly. "He did not submit samples of how the colors would look together." "I can provide samples," I said. "I brought paint chips showing exactly how the combination will appear, physical samples, on the actual house. We need to see a test section before we can approve the full application." Rebecca wrote something in her notebook. "So you are requiring Mr. Jameson to paint a test section of his house, using approved colors, before you will approve his application to paint his house with those same approved colors." "That is correct. Even though no such requirement appears anywhere in the HOA bylaws." Patricia's face flushed. "It is a reasonable request. I will paint the test section," I said, placing a hand on Rebecca's arm. "It is not a problem." We left the meeting, and Rebecca was fuming. "She is making this personal. Every single roadblock is designed to frustrate you into giving up." "I am not giving up. I am going to finish this house, and it is going to be spectacular." I painted a 6-foot test section on the front of the house and submitted photos to the HOA board. 2 weeks later, the paint plan was approved. I hired professional painters, and the exterior was completed in 3 days. The transformation was remarkable. The house went from an eyesore to something elegant and refined. The cream color warmed the space, and the white trim brightened everything. It was exactly what the house needed. But I was not done. The original roof, the terrible tan that Patricia had forced me to install, was still bothering me. I did some research and discovered that the HOA board had updated the approved color list 6 months after I had done my roof. The terracotta shade I had originally wanted was now on the approved list. I submitted a new application to replace the roof with the terracotta shingles. It was approved without comment. I had the roof redone in May, and the difference was stunning. The terracotta played beautifully against the cream walls, giving the house warmth and character. Neighbors I had never met stopped by to compliment the work. People slowed down when driving past. The house was becoming a showpiece. Patricia showed up the day after the roof was completed. She stood on the sidewalk, staring at the house with an expression I could not quite read. "You changed the roof," she said. I replaced it with an approved color from the updated list. The application was approved by the board 3 weeks ago. The old roof was only 6 months old. And it was the wrong color. You know it and I know it. This is what I wanted to do from the beginning. She walked closer, her eyes scanning every detail. "You have spent a fortune on this place. Why? You could have bought a move-in-ready home for less money." "Because I saw what this place could be. And I was right." I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was not stupid. She knew the house was becoming something special, and that realization clearly bothered her. June brought the landscaping phase. I hired a landscape architect who designed a Mediterranean-inspired garden with drought-tolerant plants, a flagstone patio, and a custom water feature. I submitted the plans to the HOA board, expecting another fight. The plans were approved with minimal changes. I think the board was getting tired of Patricia's vendetta. Donald Turner had resigned as vice president in May, citing personal reasons, but I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that he and Patricia had gotten into a screaming match about her treatment of me. Other board members were apparently questioning her leadership. The landscaping went in during July. The transformation was complete. I stood in the driveway on a Saturday morning, looking at what I had created, and felt a surge of pride. The house was unrecognizable from the disaster I had purchased 9 months earlier. It was elegant, sophisticated, and expertly crafted. Every detail was perfect. A car pulled up and an older couple got out. They introduced themselves as Robert and Linda Chen, Rebecca's parents who lived 3 streets over. "Rebecca told us about your renovation," Linda said. "We had to come see it. This is incredible. This house was an eyesore for so long, and now it is the most beautiful home in the neighborhood." We chatted for a few minutes, and then Robert said something interesting. "Have you thought about getting it appraised? Property values around here have been climbing, and with the work you have done, this place must be worth a fortune." I had not thought about an appraisal. I was not planning to sell, but curiosity got the better of me. So I called an appraiser recommended by my realtor. The appraiser, a meticulous man named Tom Chen, no relation to Rebecca or her parents, spent 3 hours measuring, photographing, and documenting every detail of the house. He took notes on the custom finishes, the high-end appliances, the quality of the materials. He measured the square footage, including the converted attic suite, which had added nearly 800 square feet to the original footprint. 2 weeks later, Tom called with the results. "Mr. Jameson, I have been doing appraisals in this area for 20 years, and I have to say, your renovation is one of the finest I have ever seen. Based on comparable sales, the quality of the work, and the current market conditions, I am appraising your property at $3.4 million. I nearly dropped the phone. $3.4 million. That is correct. There is a property on Oak Ridge Drive, the HOA president's house actually, that sold for $2.8 million last year. Your house is superior in almost every measurable way. Better finishes, larger square footage, more modern systems. If you put this on the market, I think you would get asking price within a week. Patricia Henderson's house was worth $2.8 million, and mine was now worth $3.4 million. The irony was almost too perfect. I was not planning to sell, but I wanted Patricia to know. I wanted her to understand that her mockery, her harassment, and her petty violations had been for nothing. I had created something extraordinary despite her best efforts to stop me. I printed out the appraisal report and attended the August HOA board meeting. Patricia was there, of course, looking annoyed that I had shown up. During the public comment period, I stood and addressed the board. I want to thank the board for their oversight during my renovation project. Despite some initial challenges, I believe we have all worked together to create something that benefits the entire community. I recently had my property appraised, and I thought the board might be interested in the results. I handed copies of the appraisal to each board member. Patricia took hers reluctantly, and I watched her face as she read the number. Her expression went from confusion to shock to barely contained rage. "This cannot be accurate," she said, her voice tight. "The appraiser is fully licensed and has 20 years of experience in this market. The report is based on comparable sales and standard industry practices. Your house is not worth more than mine. That is absurd." One of the other board members, a woman named Susan Ng, spoke up. "Actually, Patricia, this makes sense. The renovations are exceptional. I have driven past the property several times, and it really is stunning. It was an abandoned wreck 9 months ago, and now it is the most valuable property in Riverside Oaks," I said calmly. "I just wanted to share the good news with the board. A rising tide lifts all boats, as they say. High-quality renovations benefit everyone's property values." I left the meeting and went home, knowing I had just lit a fuse. Patricia Henderson was not going to take this quietly. Sure enough, 3 days later, I received a notice that the HOA was conducting a comprehensive property review of my house. They wanted to inspect every aspect of the renovation to ensure full compliance with all bylaws and regulations. Rebecca advised me to allow the inspection. "Let them look. Everything you have done is legal and permitted. They will not find anything." The inspection was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. Patricia showed up with 2 other board members, Susan and a man named Richard Kelly, plus the HOA's attorney, Gerald Morrison, and a private inspector they had hired. They spent 2 hours going through every room, every closet, every detail. They measured ceiling heights, checked window placements, examined the HVAC system, and photographed everything. Patricia was clearly hoping to find some violation, some excuse to fine me or force modifications. They found nothing. Every aspect of the renovation was properly permitted, properly executed, and in compliance with all applicable codes and regulations. The interior work did not require HOA approval, and the exterior work had all been approved by the board itself. As they were leaving, Susan pulled me aside. "I want you to know that not everyone on the board supports this witch hunt," she said quietly. "Patricia has been obsessed with your property since you bought it. Some of us think she is out of line. I appreciate you saying that. There is a board election coming up in October. Patricia's term is up, and she is running for re-election. You might want to pay attention to that election." The idea had not occurred to me, but Susan was right. If Patricia was voted out, my life would become significantly easier. I started paying attention to the neighborhood politics. Patricia had been HOA president for 6 years, running unopposed in every election. People were afraid to challenge her because she was vindictive and held grudges. But I also learned that many residents were tired of her aggressive enforcement tactics and petty rule-mongering. I attended a neighborhood barbecue in September and talked to some of the residents. Many of them had their own Patricia stories. One couple had been fined repeatedly for parking their Tesla in the driveway overnight, because the HOA rules only mentioned passenger cars, and Patricia insisted that electric vehicles were not specifically covered. Another family had been cited for having the wrong shade of mulch in their flower beds. An elderly man had been fined for letting his grass grow to 4.2 inches during a week when he was hospitalized. The frustration was widespread, but no one wanted to run against Patricia because it would paint a target on their back. What if someone who already has a target ran? I suggested. That was how I ended up running for HOA president. Rebecca thought I was crazy. You do not want this headache. HOA boards are thankless work. Patricia has cost me thousands of dollars in fines, most of them bogus. She has made this renovation 10 times harder than it needed to be, and she is doing the same thing to other people in this neighborhood. Someone needs to stand up to her. I filed my paperwork to run for president. The election would be held at the October annual meeting, with all homeowners entitled to vote. Patricia's reaction was predictable. I received a violation notice claiming that my campaign flyers, which I had personally delivered to mailboxes, violated HOA regulations about solicitation. Rebecca sent a letter explaining that campaign materials for HOA elections were explicitly protected under California law, and that any attempt to suppress my campaign would result in legal action. The violation notice was quietly withdrawn. I campaigned on a platform of common sense enforcement, transparent governance, and treating homeowners with respect. I pointed out that HOA fees had increased every year under Patricia's leadership, but that amenities and services had not improved proportionally. I promised to review the Byzantine rulebook and eliminate unnecessary regulations. Patricia campaigned on her record of maintaining standards and keeping Riverside Oaks, one of the premier communities in the Sacramento area. She repeatedly brought up the condition of my house when I had bought it, implying that I was the kind of person who brought down property values. That strategy backfired. People could see what the house looked like now. They could see that I had invested significant money and effort into creating something beautiful. Patricia's attacks just made her look petty. The annual meeting in October was packed. Over 100 homeowners showed up, far more than the usual 20 or 30. The voting was done by secret ballot, with results announced at the end of the meeting. When the votes were counted, I had won by a margin of 72 to 38. I was the new HOA president. Patricia's face went white. She stood, gathered her papers, and walked out without a word. The remaining board members congratulated me, and Susan looked relieved. "Thank God," she whispered. "You have no idea how difficult she has made everything." My first act as president was to review all outstanding violation notices and fines. I discovered that Patricia had been selectively enforcing rules, targeting people she did not like, while ignoring identical violations by her friends and allies. I found documentation of fines that had been applied unfairly, including several against my own property. I brought this to the board's attention, and we voted to refund all improperly assessed fines from the past year. My refund alone was over $4,000. My second act was to hire a new management company. Premier Community Services had been complicit in Patricia's schemes, either through incompetence or deliberate malice. We switched to a firm with better reviews and clearer accounting practices. My third act was to form a committee to review and revise the HOA bylaws. We spent 3 months going through the rulebook, eliminating redundant and overly restrictive regulations. We simplified the approval process for renovations. We clarified what was and was not subject to HOA oversight. The revised bylaws were put to a community vote in January and passed with over 80% approval. Patricia moved out of Riverside Oaks in December. I heard through the grapevine that she had taken a job in Arizona and sold her house. The new owners were a young couple with 2 kids who were thrilled to be part of the community. With Patricia gone, the neighborhood became noticeably more relaxed. People started tackling renovation projects they had been putting off. Property values continued to climb. The angry, suspicious atmosphere that had defined the HOA under Patricia's leadership was replaced with something closer to actual community. I served as HOA president for 2 years before stepping down. By then, the board had established new norms of fairness and transparency. We had updated the community amenities, repaired the pool that had been leaking for years, and organized neighborhood events that brought people together. As for my house, I decided not to sell. I had put too much of myself into the renovation to let it go. Instead, I moved in. After 15 years of flipping houses and moving every 8 to 12 months, I was ready to stay somewhere. And I had created exactly the kind of home I wanted to live in. The house on Magnolia Lane, the abandoned disaster that Patricia and others had laughed at, became my permanent residence. I set up my contracting office in the converted garage. I hosted neighborhood barbecues on the flagstone patio. I watched the oak trees change with the seasons from my master suite balcony. People often asked me if the whole ordeal was worth it. The stress, the fines, the battles with Patricia, the months of grueling work. The answer was always yes, not because of the appraised value, though that was satisfying, not because I had proven Patricia wrong, though that had its own sweet justice, but because I had taken something broken and forgotten and turned it into something beautiful and functional. I had seen potential where others saw only problems, and I had persevered through every obstacle to make that vision real. That was worth more than any appraisal could capture. One afternoon in March, about 2 years after I had completed the renovation, I was working in the garden when a car pulled up. A woman got out, someone I did not recognize, and walked up the driveway. "Excuse me, are you Frank Jameson?" "I am." "My name is Deanna Wilson. I am a realtor working with a client who is very interested in properties in this neighborhood. When I showed them pictures of your house, they insisted I reach out to you. They want to know if you would consider selling. The house is not for sale. They are prepared to offer $4 million. I paused, the garden shears still in my hand. $4 million. That was more than 10 times what I had paid for the property less than 3 years earlier. That is a generous offer, but I am not interested in selling. I live here. Deanna nodded, looking disappointed but not surprised. I understand. If you ever change your mind, please give me a call. She handed me a business card and left. I stood there for a moment, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this point. The abandoned house, the mocking laughter, the endless violations, the battles with Patricia, the late nights and early mornings, the satisfaction of seeing each phase of the renovation come together. $4 million was a lot of money. But this house was worth more than that to me. It represented persistence, vision, and the refusal to let small-minded people dictate what was possible. I went back to my gardening, trimming the roses that were just starting to bloom. The house stood behind me, solid and beautiful, a testament to what could be accomplished with skill, determination, and a stubborn refusal to give up. The story of the house on Magnolia Lane became something of a legend in Riverside Oaks. People pointed it out to visitors as an example of what could be done with the right vision and effort. New homeowners sought my advice on their own renovation projects. The house that had once been a neighborhood embarrassment became a source of neighborhood pride. As for Patricia Henderson, I heard occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. She had apparently joined the HOA board in her new community in Arizona and was back to her old habits of aggressive enforcement and petty rule mongering. Some people never change, but I had changed. The experience of buying and renovating that house, of fighting Patricia's campaign of harassment, of standing up for myself and eventually for the whole neighborhood, had taught me something important. Sometimes the best response to mockery and opposition is not anger or resentment, but simply doing the work and proving the doubters wrong. The house on Magnolia Lane was my proof. Every custom detail, every high-end finish, every carefully considered design choice was evidence that I had been right all along. The abandoned house had not been beyond saving. It had just been waiting for someone who could see past the decay to the possibility underneath. I had been that person. And the result was something spectacular. The satisfaction I felt every time I walked through my front door was worth more than any dollar amount. The house was not just where I lived. It was proof of what I was capable of creating when I refused to accept other people's limited vision of what was possible. That was the real value of the house on Magnolia Lane. Not the appraised price, not the market value, not even the perfect craftsmanship. The real value was in what the house represented: perseverance, vision, and the courage to see a project through no matter how many obstacles stood in the way. Patricia had laughed when I bought the house. She had spent months trying to make me fail. She had thrown every bureaucratic roadblock and petty violation at me that she could devise. But in the end, I had the last laugh. My house was worth more than hers had been. My renovation had become a neighborhood showcase, and I had helped free an entire community from her tyrannical leadership. The abandoned house on Magnolia Lane was not beyond saving, and neither was the Riverside Oaks HOA. Both just needed someone willing to do the hard work of transformation. I was glad I had been that person. Not because I wanted recognition or praise, but because I had created something I was genuinely proud of. Something that would stand as an example of quality craftsmanship and thoughtful design for decades to come. That was the true measure of success. Not what others thought, not the appraised value, not winning some petty battle with a vindictive HOA president. Success was creating something excellent and knowing in your bones that you had done it right. The house on Magnolia Lane was my success. And no amount of mockery or harassment or violation notices could ever take that away from me. I had bought the abandoned house that everyone laughed at. I had renovated it into something spectacular. And in the process, I had proven that sometimes the biggest disasters contain the greatest opportunities. You just have to have the vision to see them and the determination to bring that vision to life. That was the lesson of Magnolia Lane. And it was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life, a reminder that the best way to silence doubters is not with words but with work, with persistence, with the undeniable evidence of a job done exceptionally well. The house stood as that evidence. Beautiful, valuable, and undeniably mine. The abandoned disaster had become a masterpiece, and that transformation was the most satisfying achievement of my entire career. Patricia had laughed when I bought the house, but I had the last laugh. And mine echoed through every perfectly crafted room, every thoughtfully designed space, every detail that proved she had been wrong and I had been right. The house was my victory. And it was a victory I got to enjoy every single day. Several months after I had stepped down as HOA president, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from a law firm in Sacramento, and my first thought was that Patricia had decided to sue me for something. But the letter was not from Patricia. It was from the family that had inherited the house originally, the family that had sold it to me for $350,000. They had seen news of the Riverside Oaks HOA board changes, which had been covered in a local newspaper article about community governance. The article had mentioned my renovation and included a photo of the house. They had also heard about the appraised value. The letter was not a legal threat. It was a thank you note. The family explained that they had felt guilty about the condition of the house when they sold it. Their grandmother had loved that house, and watching it deteriorate during the probate process had been painful. They had sold it cheap because they assumed it would be torn down, and they did not want to watch that happen. Learning that someone had not only saved the house, but transformed it into something beautiful, had brought them closure. They included a photo of their grandmother standing in front of the house in the 1980s, when it had been well maintained and lovely. I framed that photo and hung it in my office. It was a reminder that houses are not just structures. They are homes with histories and memories. By saving this house, I had not just created something valuable. I had honored the memory of the woman who had loved it first. That perspective added another layer of meaning to the renovation. I had not just built equity or proven Patricia wrong. I had preserved something that mattered, something that connected past to present. The house on Magnolia Lane had a future now, not just a past, and that future was bright. I eventually expanded my contracting business, focusing on high-end renovations and historical restorations. My work on Magnolia Lane became my portfolio piece, the project I showed to potential clients when they wanted to understand what I was capable of creating. The business grew. I hired employees. We took on projects throughout Northern California, transforming neglected properties into showcase homes. Each project was different, but they all shared the same philosophy. See the potential, do the work, create something excellent. That philosophy had been forged in the battle over Magnolia Lane. Patricia's harassment had tested my resolve and forced me to be meticulous about every detail. The HOA's Byzantine regulations had taught me patience and the importance of documentation. The neighborhood's skepticism had motivated me to exceed every expectation. In a strange way, Patricia had made me better at my job. She had pushed me to be more careful, more thorough, more determined. The house had been transformed not despite her opposition, but partially because of it. I would never thank her for that. Her behavior had been cruel and unjustified, but I could acknowledge that adversity had sharpened my skills and strengthened my resolve. The house on Magnolia Lane stood as proof of what I could accomplish under the worst circumstances. Every future project would be easier by comparison. Years passed. The house appreciated further in value as the Sacramento market continued to climb. Riverside Oaks remained one of the most desirable communities in the area, and the HOA, under new leadership, maintained standards without the oppressive enforcement that had characterized Patricia's reign. I never saw Patricia again. I occasionally wondered if she had learned anything from the experience, if she had reflected on her behavior and changed her approach. But I suspected not. Some people are too invested in their own righteousness to ever consider that they might be wrong. That was her loss, not mine. I had moved forward, built a successful business, and created a home I loved. Patricia's legacy was a trail of resentful homeowners and a forced resignation. Mine was a masterpiece on Magnolia Lane and a thriving company built on quality and integrity. The contrast spoke for itself. One evening, sitting on my patio watching the sun set through the oak trees, I reflected on the entire journey. The abandoned house, the mocking laughter, the endless battles, the satisfaction of completion, the unexpected victory in the HOA election, the lasting impact on the community. It had been worth it. Every moment of frustration, every dollar in bogus fines, every sleepless night worrying about permits and approvals. All of it had been worth it to create something excellent and to prove that vision and determination can overcome even the most determined opposition. The house on Magnolia Lane was more than a house. It was a statement, a declaration that excellence is possible, that transformation is achievable, that people who laugh at your dreams are not the ones who determine your success. I determined my success. And I had succeeded beyond even my own expectations. The abandoned house that Patricia laughed at was now worth more than her house had been. That fact would always bring me a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I am petty, but because justice, when it comes, should be savored. I had taken her mockery and turned it into motivation. I had taken her obstacles and turned them into opportunities to prove my skill. I had taken her worst and turned it into my best. That was the power of perseverance. That was the reward of refusing to quit. That was the victory of vision over mockery, of determination over discouragement, of excellence over opposition. The house on Magnolia Lane embodied all of that. And I got to live in it, surrounded by the evidence of what I had accomplished, reminded every day that I had been right to buy that abandoned house, right to see its potential, right to fight for my vision. Patricia had laughed, but I had won, and that made all the difference. The sun set behind the oak trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. I sat on my patio in my house, on my property, in my neighborhood, and felt completely at peace. This was where I belonged. This was what I had built. This was my victory. And no one could ever take that away from me. The house on Magnolia Lane stood behind me, beautiful and solid and undeniably mine. The abandoned disaster had become a masterpiece. The laughingstock had become the crown jewel of Riverside Oaks. That transformation was my legacy. And it was a legacy I was proud to claim. Frank Jameson, contractor and HOA president, had taken the worst house in the neighborhood and turned it into the best. He had faced mockery and harassment and bureaucratic nightmares, and he had overcome them all through skill, determination, and an unwavering belief in his vision. The house was proof that he had been right all along, and that proof was worth more than any appraisal could ever capture. The story of Magnolia Lane was complete. The abandoned house had been saved. The tyrant HOA president had been defeated. The neighborhood had been transformed, and I had created a home that would stand as a testament to quality craftsmanship for generations to come. That was enough. That was everything. That was victory in its purest form. I finished my drink, stood up, and walked back into my house. My beautiful, valuable, perfect house. The house that Patricia had laughed at. The house that was now worth more than hers had ever been. The house that proved, beyond any doubt, that I had been right and she had been wrong. And that was the most satisfying feeling in the world.